The radio hissed with static before a voice cut through tight with controlled panic. Any aircraft! Any aircraft! This is SEAL Team 7, call sign Poseidon. We are surrounded in Korangal Valley. 200 plus hostiles with heavy weapons. Multiple wounded, ammunition critical. Requesting immediate close air support. For 3 heartbeats, only static answered. Then another burst of desperate words. I repeat, this is Poseidon. We have high-value intelligence asset. Cannot fall into enemy hands. Grid coordinates follow. Major Alexandra Alex Morgan sat alone in the cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt II call sign, Valkyrie, patrolling at 40,000 feet over the rugged mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The aircraft, affectionately known as the Warthog, wasn't pretty. Its twin engines hung awkwardly above the fuselage, its wings stubby and thick. But what it lacked in beauty, it made up for in purpose. The entire aircraft was essentially built around its fearsome GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a weapon that fired 30mm depleted uranium rounds at 3,900 per minute with enough force to tear through tank armor like paper. Alex checked her fuel gauge. 12 minutes of flight time remained. This was her final patrol before rotating back stateside after a 9-month deployment. 12 minutes. Then home. Her eyes narrowed as she recognized the intensity in the SEAL's voice. She had heard that tone before. It was the sound of men preparing to die well. Alex keyed her mic. Poseidon, this is Valkyrie. I copy your request for close air support. Be advised, I am 12 minutes to bingo fuel. Can you hold? The response was immediate. Negative, Valkyrie. We are combat ineffective in 10. 3 wounded, 1 critical. Taliban closing from 3 sides. The next voice she heard sent a shock through her system. Valkyrie, this is Poseidon Actual, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Blackwood. The voice was steady despite gunfire crackling in the background. We're in a box canyon, 3 clicks northwest of Objective Sierra. High walls on 3 sides, hostiles on all high ground positions. They have at least 2 DSHK heavy machine guns in multiple RPGs. We're pinned down with nowhere to run. Alex felt her heart skip. She knew that voice. Blackwood. The SEAL who had pulled her from the wreckage of her shot-down aircraft 2 years earlier in Helmand Province. The man who had carried her 12 miles through hostile territory to safety, both of them hunted like animals. She glanced at her fuel gauge again. 12 minutes. The coordinates appeared on her screen. Korangal Valley, the Valley of Death, they called it. One of the most dangerous pieces of terrain in all of Afghanistan. She calculated the distance. 4 minutes to reach the SEALs. That would leave 8 minutes of fuel to make a difference or die trying. Poseidon, I'm 4 minutes out. Mark your position. Roger, Valkyrie. Orange smoke out now. Be advised, the entire eastern ridge is crawling with hostiles. They have Russian Zu-23 anti-aircraft weapons on the southern approach. Alex pushed the stick forward, descending from 40,000 to 20,000 feet, her eyes scanning the forbidding landscape below. Even from this height, she could see why the Korangal was legendary among combat veterans. Sheer cliff walls rose hundreds of feet. Narrow canyons twisted like snakes. Natural stone formations created perfect defensive positions. This was land that had broken armies since Alexander the Great. No wonder the SEALs were trapped. The A-10 dropped lower, the air growing turbulent as mountain winds buffeted the aircraft. Alex's mind raced through combat calculations, evaluating angles of attack weapons load danger zones. She had a full drum of 150 rounds for her cannon, plus Maverick missiles and a mixed payload of bombs. Enough to change the battle below if she could survive the defenses long enough to use them. She keyed her radio to the command frequency. Bagram Control, this is Valkyrie, responding to troops in contact Korangal Valley Sector 9er. SEAL Team 7 pinned down. Request immediate clearance for danger close fire support. The voice that answered was familiar and unwelcome. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Hayes, her direct superior and most persistent critic. Negative, Valkyrie. This is Hayes. That area is designated high threat. Multiple anti-aircraft positions confirmed. Return to base immediately. Apache gunships are being scrambled. Alex checked her instruments again. Sir, Apaches are 20 minutes out minimum. SEALs report combat ineffective in 10. Request override. Negative, Major. That's a direct order. The risk assessment is unacceptable. Alex's jaw tightened. Risk assessment. The same words Hayes had used 18 months ago in Fallujah. The same words that had cost 3 Marines their lives while she circled helplessly above following regulations. A new voice cut through the radio traffic. "Morgan, this is Colonel Harrison." James Harrison, wing commander, 35-year veteran, her father's oldest friend and the man who had handed her the folded flag at her father's funeral. "I'm here, sir." Hayes is correct about the threat assessment. Harrison's voice was measured official. Then it softened imperceptibly. "But I'm looking at the manifest. You're piloting tail number 967, correct?" "Affirmed, sir." Alex felt a chill. Harrison knew exactly what aircraft she was flying. Number 967, nicknamed Vengeful Widow. The same A-10 her father had flown during Desert Storm. The same aircraft that was scheduled for decommissioning next month, deemed too old for continued service. "Then you should know your aircraft is exhibiting anomalous transponder readings. You're dropping off my screens. Looks like communications might be compromised." Harrison was giving her an out, a way to disobey orders without direct insubordination, a chance to make her own choice. "Roger that, sir. Experiencing intermittent comm failure." She switched channels again. "Poseidon Valkyrie inbound. ETA 3 minutes. Hold tight." As Alex descended below 15,000 feet, the memories surged unbidden. Her father's face in the faded photograph on her desk. Colonel William Morgan, A-10 pilot in legend among close air support specialists. KIA during Desert Storm, attempting exactly what she was about to do, flying into a heavily defended position to save American lives. His last words over the radio had become part of Air Force lore. "As long as there's a way in, there's a way out." Her father's pilot's notebook, worn with age and use, sat in her flight suit pocket. She carried it on every mission, a talisman and guide. Inside were his handwritten notes, techniques, observations from hundreds of combat sorties. And on the first page, in his steady handwriting, "The purpose of the A-10 is not to return safely to base. The purpose is to bring our people home." At 10,000 feet, Alex could make out the distinctive orange smoke rising from the valley floor. She could also see muzzle flashes on the ridgelines, the occasional tracer round arcing through the air. The SEALs were fighting for their lives down there. Her onboard threat warning system began to ping. Enemy radar was tracking her. Soon, very soon, they would start firing. "Approaching the valley now," she radioed to Blackwood. "I count multiple hostiles on the eastern ridge. I'll hit them first, then work the southern approach. Get your men as low and covered as possible. This will be danger close." "Copy that, Valkyrie. We're hugging dirt now." Blackwood's voice had a new edge to it. Hope. Cleared hot. Alex banked the A-10 into position for her first attack run, lining up the eastern ridge in her sights. The approach was brutal. Jagged stone pillars jutted upward like nature's own anti-aircraft defenses. She threaded the Warthog between them, knowing that a misjudgment of a few feet would mean wings torn away, a fiery death. The altimeter unwound 8,000, 6,000, 4,000, lower than most pilots would ever dare hear. At 3,000 feet, her threat warning system screamed. A Taliban gunner on the eastern ridge had her in his sights. No time to think. Alex jammed the stick right, then left the A-10 dancing between streams of tracer fire as she lined up her shot. At 2,000 feet, she pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared to life. The entire airframe shuddered as 70 rounds per second erupted from the 7 rotating barrels. Each projectile was the size of a beer bottle, traveling at 3,500 feet per second, designed to slice through Soviet tank armor. Against human targets and light fortifications, it was apocalyptic. The eastern ridge erupted in dust, debris, and fire. The gun's distinctive sound echoed through the valley, a deep, thunderous brrr that soldiers around the world recognized instantly. The sound of salvation. Alex held the trigger for 3 seconds, watching through her HUD as 210 rounds stitched across the ridgeline. Enemy positions disappeared, replaced by craters and silence. She pulled hard on the stick, the G-forces pressing her into her seat as the Warthog climbed and banked left for another run. A jagged spire of rock passed so close to her left wing that she could see individual cracks in its weathered surface. Valkyrie Poseidon, direct hit on the eastern ridge. They're breaking contact on that side. Southern approach is still hot. They're moving a DSHK into position. Alex rolled the A-10 into a tight bank, pulling her nose toward the southern ridge. This approach would be even more dangerous. The anti-aircraft guns Hayes had mentioned would be waiting for her. She dropped lower still, using the terrain for cover, popping up only when ready to attack. The Warthog wasn't built for stealth or speed, but in the hands of a skilled pilot, it could be surprisingly nimble. And Alexandra Morgan was among the finest Warthog pilots in the Air Force. As she lined up her second attack run, memories of Fallujah flashed through her mind. The desperate calls for help, the by-the-book decision to maintain altitude above the threat envelope, the sickening knowledge that men were dying while she circled helplessly above following regulations that suddenly seemed written in blood rather than ink. Not again. Not today. Alex keyed her secure channel. Master Sergeant Davis, you reading me? Ryan Davis's gravelly voice came back immediately. 5x5 Major, what the hell are you doing in the Korengal radar shows you way off your patrol route? Davis was her crew chief, a 59-year-old veteran with 30 years' experience maintaining A-10s. He had been her father's crew chief as well. If anyone knew the Warthog's soul, it was Davis. Remember that hydraulic fluid leak you flagged last week? The one maintenance deferred because of budget cuts? A pause. The secondary flight control system. Yeah, I remember. Hayes overrode my recommendation, said it wasn't critical. Well, it's acting up now, getting sluggish response on the right aileron. Any suggestions if it goes completely? Davis swore colorfully. You're in combat, aren't you, against orders? Running low on time and options. Here, Chief. Another pause then. Switch to manual backup if the hydraulics fail. It'll be like steering a dump truck with your pinky finger. But it'll respond. Just don't make any hard right turns or you'll drop like a stone. His voice softened. Your old man would be proud, Morgan. Bring those boys home, then bring yourself home. Understood. Copy that. Alex rolled in for her second attack run. This time she could see the ZU-23 anti-aircraft gun being wheeled into position on the southern ridge. Two men were frantically loading it, preparing to fill the sky with 23mm shells that would tear through her aircraft like tissue paper. Not today. She jinked left, then right, making her approach unpredictable. The A-10 could absorb punishment that would destroy any other aircraft, but even it had limits. Her finger hovered over the trigger, waiting for the perfect moment. The ZU-23 crew saw her coming. They swung their barrels toward her, firing desperately. Alex could see the muzzle flashes, could almost feel the rounds passing nearby. At 1,800 feet, she fired again. Another 3-second burst. The ZU-23 position disappeared in fire and smoke, the gun and its crew erased from existence. As she pulled out of her attack run, something slammed into her right wing with the force of a sledgehammer. Warning lights flashed across her console. The right aileron hydraulic system was gone, just as she'd feared. The aircraft lurched right, threatening to roll inverted. Alex fought the controls, switching to manual backup as Davis had instructed. The stick suddenly required all her strength to move, but the aircraft responded, steadying. Valkyrie, we have enemy reinforcements moving up the western slope toward your position. Blackwood's voice crackled through the radio. At least 50 fighters with ARPs. Alex checked her fuel gauge. 7 minutes remaining. Enough for one more attack run, then she'd have to decide attempt to return to base on a damaged aircraft or stay and fight until she flamed out. No decision at all, really. Copy that, Poseidon. One more pass on the western slope, then I'll maintain overwatch until fuel critical. She banked the crippled Warthog toward the western ridge, fighting the controls every inch of the way. The aircraft wanted to roll right, wanted to dive. It took all her strength and skill to keep it level and responsive. This would be the most dangerous run yet. The western slope offered no good approach angles. She'd have to come in low and slow, exposing herself to ground fire from multiple directions. As Alex lined up her approach, her radio crackled again. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes' voice cut through the ang in it, barely contained. Major Morgan, this is Hayes. Our communications seem to be restored. You are in direct violation of orders. Return to base immediately or face court-martial proceedings. I repeat, abort mission now. Alex took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. Follow orders, save her career, and leave 12 Americans to die. Or finish what she'd started and face the consequences. Her father's voice seemed to whisper from his notebook in her pocket. Not every rule is right. Not every instinct is wrong. She switched channels. Poseidon, this is Valkyrie, coming in for final attack run on the western slope. I'll hit them with everything I've got left. Danger close. Hug the earth. Roger, Valkyrie, we're flat on the deck. Blackwood's voice held something new, respect mixed with concern. But be advised, they've spotted your damage. They're concentrating fire on your right side. Copy that. Won't matter in about 60 seconds. Alex rolled in on her final attack run, descending to a mere 1,000 feet above the valley floor. At this height, she was flying through the valley rather than above it, the stone walls towering on either side. She could see the Taliban fighters clearly now, rushing up the western slope toward the SEAL position, confident in their numbers. None of them expected an A-10 to be crazy enough to fly this low through the valley. That was their final mistake. Alex lined up the entire slope in her gun sight and pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared once more, its deep bellow echoing from the canyon walls, as if the mountains themselves were announcing judgment. 5 continuous seconds, 350 rounds of uranium-tipped vengeance. The western slope simply ceased to exist as a defensible position, replaced by a churned landscape of craters and silence. As she pulled out of her attack run, multiple alarms screamed in the cockpit. The right wing had taken more hits. The engine on that side was losing power, belching black smoke. Worse, her fuel situation had become critical. 5 minutes remaining, and she was deep in hostile territory with a damaged aircraft. Valkyrie, Poseidon, you just saved our lives. Enemy forces are in full retreat on all sides. Blackwood's voice was thick with emotion. Medevac is still 15 minutes out. Can you maintain overwatch until they arrive? Alex checked her systems. The A-10 was wounded but still flying. She could stretch her RS by throttling back, maybe by a few extra minutes. Not enough to see the SEALs safely extracted, but enough to keep the enemy at bay a little longer. Affirm, Poseidon. I can give you 3 more minutes of overwatch, then I'm bingo fuel +1. She banked the damaged Warthog into a wide orbit around the SEAL position, scanning for any remaining threats. The right engine temperature was climbing into the red zone. The hydraulic pressure continued to drop. This bird was dying beneath her, but it would see the mission through, just like her father. The memories crashed over her again. She had been 12 years old when the Air Force officers came to their door, her mother collapsing in grief, the folded flag at Arlington, and James Harrison, then a young major, kneeling before her with tears in his eyes, pressing her father's pilot's notebook into her small hands. He wrote your name on the last page, Harrison had told her. He wanted you to have this when you were ready. She hadn't looked at that last page for years. Some wounds were too deep to reopen. Her radio crackled again. This time it was Colonel Harrison. Morgan, this is Nomad. Bagram sensors show significant damage to your aircraft. What's your status? Right engine overheating, hydraulics, failing fuel critical. Her voice was calm, professional. I can maintain position for 2 more minutes. Then I need to attempt return to base. A pause, then. The Apache gunships are still 12 minutes out. If you leave now, there will be a window where the SEALs are vulnerable. Translation. If she left, men might die. The same calculation her father had faced 20 years earlier. Understood, sir. I'll extend overwatch as long as possible. Hayes cut in again, his voice cold. Major Morgan, this is a direct order. Return to base immediately. Your aircraft is compromised, and you're risking a multi-million-dollar asset. As if the aircraft mattered more than the lives below. With respect, sir, I have 12 Americans still in danger. I'm maintaining overwatch until fuel absolutely critical. Alex continued her orbit, ignoring the warning lights now illuminating most of her console. The right engine temperature had exceeded limits. Metal was beginning to warp. But the Warthog kept flying stubborn as its pilot. Below, she could see the SEAL team had established a defensive perimeter around their wounded. Through breaks in the smoke, she caught glimpses of them, looking up at her aircraft, knowing she was all that stood between them and the enemy's return. 1 minute of fuel remaining, the point of no return. If she didn't turn for base now, she wouldn't make it back at all. Her father's voice again from lessons long ago. The A-10 has one job, to stand between our people and harm. Everything else is secondary. Alex keyed her mic one last time. Poseidon, this is Valkyrie. I'm at bingo fuel +3. Need to RTB now or I won't make it. Roger, Valkyrie. Blackwood's voice was solemn. We've got multiple enemy signatures still holding position beyond the ridgelines. They're waiting for you to leave. As soon as you're gone, they'll hit us again before medevac arrives. The choice crystallized before her. Leave now, save herself and her aircraft. Or stay until the fuel ran out, giving the SEALs their only chance at survival. No choice at all. Understood, Poseidon. Valkyrie extending overwatch. She switched channels one final time. Master Sergeant Davis, you still monitoring? I'm here, Major. Davis's voice was tight. Your telemetry looks like hell. You need to get that bird home now. Not happening, Chief. Need your help with a controlled flameout. I'm staying on station until the tanks run dry. Silence stretched for several seconds. Just like your old man, Davis finally said, his voice rough with emotion. All right, I'll talk you through it. But you know the odds of a successful restart at altitude with battle damage. Never tell me the odds, Chief. As Alex continued to orbit the SEAL position, a strange calm settled over her. She was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was born to do. Her father would understand. Harrison would understand. Even Hayes, beneath his rigid adherence to regulations, would understand, though he'd never admit it. The fuel gauge dipped toward empty. Warning alarms blared. The right engine began to stutter. Below, the SEALs continued to watch the skies, their salvation circling above on failing wings. And somewhere beyond the ridgelines, the enemy waited, held at bay only by the sound of the Warthog's engines and the knowledge of what its cannon could do. Valkyrie, this is Poseidon Actual. Blackwood's voice had changed, understanding in it now. We see your engine smoking. What we don't see is you leaving. Are you staying? Alex watched as the fuel gauge touched empty. The right engine coughed once, twice, then died completely. The left would follow in seconds. Affirm, Poseidon. I'll be providing overwatch until medevac arrival, one way or another. Your bird's dying. You won't make it back to base. Then I won't make it back to base. A pause, then Blackwood's voice filled with something like awe. Who are you? Alex looked down at the valley where 12 Americans waited for rescue, then out at the vastness of the Hindu Kush Mountains, stretching to the horizon. The same mountains where her father had made his final choice. Just a Warthog driver doing her job. The left engine began to sputter. Her time was up. Whatever happened next would unfold in the next few minutes. With the last of her control, Alex turned the dying A-10 toward the Taliban positions beyond the ridgeline, determined that her final act would be to place herself between the enemy and her countrymen below. As the aircraft descended on failing engines, Alexandra Morgan reached into her pocket and finally opened her father's notebook to the last page. There in fading ink were the words he had written for her alone. Alex, if you're reading this, I made the hard choice, and so will you someday. That's what it means to wear the wings. Remember, the mission isn't to come home. The mission is to bring them home. I have never been more proud than knowing you'll understand this one day. All my love, Dad. The A-10 continued its descent, engines silent, now gliding on broken wings toward whatever fate awaited. But in the valley below, 12 Americans would live to see another dawn. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was never designed to glide. Weighing over 20 tons, fully loaded with a wingspan built for stability rather than lift, the Warthog dropped through the Afghan sky like a wounded predator. Alexandra Morgan had only moments to transform certain death into a fighting chance. With both engines silent, the cockpit eerily quiet except for the rush of air, Alex forced herself to focus. Years of training took over. Emergency restart procedures practiced hundreds of times in simulators, now executed with her life hanging in the balance. Valkyrie, your descent rate is critical. Master Sergeant Davis's voice crackled through her headset. The veteran crew chief was watching her telemetry from Bagram, his decades of experience the only lifeline she had. You need altitude to restart that left engine. Alex said nothing, conserving her concentration. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced precision. The right engine was beyond recovery, but the left might still respond. She needed to maintain enough airspeed to keep the auxiliary power unit running enough to spark the ignition sequence. Korengal Valley fell away behind her as she nursed the crippled aircraft toward a plateau in the distance. Below, the SEALs watched their guardian angel depart, knowing that enemy fighters would soon return. Come on, she whispered to the aircraft. Just a little more. At 12,000 feet, she initiated the restart sequence on the left engine. Nothing happened. The turbine refused to catch. Hydraulic pressure is still dropping, she reported to Davis. Left engine ignition sequence failed. Try again at 10,000. Davis instructed, his voice steady despite the tension. And cycle your backup power. You might have a short in the ignition circuit. The mountains rushed up to meet her jagged peaks, indifferent to her struggle. Alex had flown this region enough to know that most of the terrain below offered no chance of survival. No flat surfaces, no emergency landing strips, only rock and gravity waiting to claim her. At 10,000 feet, she tried again. This time a splutter, a cough from the left engine, then silence. Almost, Davis encouraged. One more time. Purge the fuel line first. Alex followed his instructions, knowing this would be her final attempt before she'd need to focus entirely on finding somewhere, anywhere to put the aircraft down. The left engine coughed again, then caught with a roar that nearly made her weep with relief. One engine was infinitely better than none. It wouldn't get her back to Bagram, but it might give her options beyond a funeral pyre in the Hindu Kush. Engine restart successful, she reported, unable to keep the emotion from her voice. Thank God, Davis responded. Now get that bird level and see what systems you still have. Alex nursed the throttle, careful not to overtax the damaged engine. The A-10 began to stabilize, no longer falling, but maintaining a gradual descent. She ran through her checklist, cataloging what still worked and what was beyond recovery. Hydraulic pressure remained dangerously low. The right aileron was frozen. The flight computer showed multiple system failures, but she was still flying, and that counted for something. Her radio crackled again. Major Morgan, this is Colonel Harrison. We're tracking your position. Damage assessment. One engine operational at 70% capacity. Hydraulics critical. Flight controls severely compromised. Fuel remaining for approximately 30 minutes of flight time. A pause, then Harrison spoke again, his voice carefully neutral. The nearest friendly airfield is FOB Shank, but that's 40 minutes away with a functioning aircraft. The message was clear. She wasn't going to make it to a proper runway. Understood, sir. I'm looking for alternatives. The Apaches are 3 minutes out from the SEAL position, Harrison added. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood sends his thanks. The medevac is right behind them. At least that mission was accomplished. The SEALs would make it home. Alex scanned the terrain ahead, looking for any possible landing site. The mountains offered little hope, but as she crested a ridge, she spotted something in the distance. A relatively flat section of plateau, perhaps half a mile long. Not ideal, but better than the alternatives. I've identified a potential landing site, she reported. High plateau, heading 090, approximately 15 miles from my position. Davis's voice cut in concern. Satellite imagery shows that area is surrounded by hostile villages. You'd be landing in Taliban territory. Copy that. Alternatives. Silence answered her. Everyone knew there were no alternatives. It was this plateau or the side of a mountain. Harrison spoke again. Morgan, we have a QRF standing by at Bagram. If you can put it down in one piece, they can reach you within 90 minutes by helicopter. 90 minutes in hostile territory with a broken body if she survived the landing at all. The odds were grim, but Alex had never been one to dwell on odds. Roger that, beginning approach to landing site. As she banked the wounded Warthog toward the plateau, new warning lights illuminated her console. The left engine was beginning to overheat, pushed beyond its limits by carrying the full burden of flight. Engine temperature redlining. She reported, her voice calm despite the implications. I've got maybe 5 minutes before complete failure. Understood, Harrison replied. We're tracking your descent. QRF is spinning up now. Alex focused on her approach, calculating angles and descent rates. Landing an A-10 under ideal conditions required skill. Landing one with failed hydraulics, a single failing engine, and compromised control surfaces was something else entirely. A test of skill, nerve, and luck in equal measure. She thought of her father again. Had he faced similar calculations in his final moments? Had he known he wouldn't survive, but pressed on regardless? The plateau grew larger in her windscreen. From this altitude, she could see it wasn't as flat as it had first appeared. Rocky outcroppings dotted the surface. A dry stream bed cut across one section. Not ideal, but it would have to do. Beginning final approach, she announced, more for the flight recorder than for her handlers at Bagram. If things went wrong, at least they'd know she'd done everything by the book. The wounded A-10 descended through 5,000 feet, the single engine screaming in protest. Alex kept her eyes on the landing site, adjusting her glide path with subtle control inputs. Too steep and she'd impact with lethal force. Too shallow and she'd run out of plateau before she ran out of speed. At 3,000 feet, the left engine gave a violent shudder. Metal fatigue. Bearings burning out. The temperature gauge had moved beyond the red into territory the designers hadn't even bothered to mark. Engine failure imminent, she reported, switching to full glide approach. As if answering her prediction, the left engine seized with a sound like tearing metal. Silence returned to the cockpit, broken only by the rush of air and the beating of her heart. The A-10 was once again a glider, and not a very good one. Alex felt the nose wanting to drop the aircraft, eager to enter a death spiral. She fought the controls, using her entire body weight against the stick, forcing the Warthog to maintain a semblance of a glide path. The plateau rushed up to meet her. 2,000 feet, 1,000, 500. Landing gear, Davis asked over the radio. Negative, Alex replied, her voice strained from physical exertion. Hydraulic pressure insufficient. This will be a belly landing. She could almost feel Davis wincing at the other end of the radio connection. A belly landing in an A-10 was a desperate measure. The aircraft wasn't designed for it. The massive gun in the nose would dig into the ground, potentially causing the aircraft to cartwheel if it caught at the wrong angle. But it was the only option left. Brace for impact in 30 seconds, she announced, her voice steady despite everything. Alex made her final adjustments, fighting the dying aircraft every inch of the way. The plateau's surface details became clearer. Rock scrub vegetation, uneven terrain. No pilot could ask for worse conditions, but then again, no pilot in her right mind would attempt this landing in the first place. 10 seconds. She positioned the A-10 for the smoothest section of ground she could identify, knowing it was still rough enough to tear the aircraft apart. 5 seconds. Alex tightened her harness one final time and tucked her chin against her chest. Brace, brace, brace. The impact came with a violence that defied description. Metal screamed as the A-10's belly slammed into rock and dirt. The airframe shuddered as if being torn apart by giant hands. The massive cannon in the nose dug a furrow in the earth, slowing the aircraft with brutal deceleration. Alex was thrown against her harness with bone-crushing force. Her helmet slammed into the canopy despite her precautions. The world became noise and pain and the smell of torn metal and spilled fuel. For what seemed like eternity, the A-10 plowed across the plateau, shedding pieces of itself with each yard. The right wing struck an outcropping and sheared away completely. The tail section crumpled. Yet somehow the cockpit section remained intact, protected by the titanium bathtub designed to withstand direct hits from anti-aircraft fire. Finally, mercifully, the wreckage ground to a halt in a cloud of dust and smoke. Silence fell over the plateau, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and the hiss of fluids leaking onto hot surfaces. Inside the crumpled cockpit, Alexandra Morgan hung limply against her harness, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead, alive against all odds. But for how long remained to be seen. Her radio was dead, her aircraft destroyed. She was alone in hostile territory, 90 minutes from rescue at best. If the crash hadn't killed her, the Taliban very well might. Consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by waves of pain. Alex blinked, trying to orient herself. The cockpit was tilted at an odd angle. Smoke curled through cracks in the canopy frame. Her instrument panel was dark dead. Her training asserted itself through the fog of pain. Assess, react, survive. She ran through a mental checklist cataloging her injuries. The pain in her chest suggested cracked ribs. Her left arm responded sluggishly, possibly dislocated. The warm wetness down the side of her face was blood from the head wound. Not great, but survivable. Next priority, extract from the aircraft before it caught fire. The smell of jet fuel was strong, and any spark could turn the wreckage into an inferno. With her good arm, Alex fumbled for the canopy release. It was jammed. The crash had warped the frame, sealing her inside. Her survival knife was her next option. She drew it from its sheath and hammered at the plexiglass, creating a spiderweb of cracks. 3 solid blows later, the canopy shattered. Fresh air rushed in, carrying with it the acrid taste of smoke and fuel. Alex released her harness and pulled herself painfully from the cockpit, falling awkwardly to the ground outside. The impact sent fresh waves of agony through her injured body, but she forced herself to keep moving, crawling away from the wreckage. She'd made it perhaps 20 yards when the reality of her situation fully registered. The plateau stretched around her barren and hostile. In the distance, mountains rose against the sky. And somewhere out there, people would be coming, attracted by the crash, seeking survivors, some to rescue, others to kill. It was time to prepare for either outcome. Alex dragged herself back to the wreckage, fighting through pain with each movement. Her survival pack was still in the cockpit, containing essentials she'd need to stay alive until rescue arrived. Water, first aid, emergency rations, and her sidearm an M9 Beretta. Retrieving the pack was an ordeal that left her gasping and sweating, but the alternative was certain death. Back on relatively safe ground, she took stock of her resources and situation. The emergency locator beacon from her survival kit was active, broadcasting her position to any friendly forces monitoring the frequency. The QRF from Bagram would be homing in on that signal, but so might others who monitored American frequencies. Her watch showed she'd been unconscious for approximately 20 minutes. That meant over an hour until potential rescue, assuming nothing delayed the QRF. Alex administered emergency first aid to herself, bandaging the head wound and fashioning a crude sling for her injured arm. She swallowed painkillers from the kit, knowing she'd need a clear head despite the pain. Once immediate medical needs were addressed, she turned to security. The plateau offered little natural cover. Her best option was to move away from the crash site, find a defensible position, and wait for extraction. With her good arm, she checked her Beretta. 15 rounds in the magazine, one in the chamber. Not much if she encountered a determined enemy force, but better than facing them unarmed. Alex selected a rocky outcropping about 100 yards from the wreckage. It would provide some cover while giving her visibility in all directions. Gathering her strength, she began the painful journey across the open ground, each step a test of will against pain and exhaustion. She was halfway to her chosen position when she heard it. The distinctive sound of engines in the distance. Not the heavy thump of American helicopters, but the higher pitch of small motorcycles. Taliban scouts, almost certainly. They'd seen the crash. They were coming to investigate. Alex quickened her pace despite the agony it caused. She needed to reach cover before they arrived, needed to become the hunter rather than the prey. The outcropping seemed impossibly far away, but she forced herself forward, one agonizing step after another. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel focused only on her destination. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, but she refused to stop. Finally, she reached the rocks and collapsed behind them, her body slick with fresh sweat and blood. The motorcycle engines were louder now. Minutes away, not seconds, but close enough to eliminate any chance of further movement. This was where she would make her stand. Alex checked her weapon one final time, then positioned herself to observe without being seen. From her vantage point, she could see her ruined aircraft and most of the surrounding plateau. The mountains beyond seemed to watch with indifference, having seen countless battles throughout history. The motorcycles appeared at the edge of the plateau, 3 of them each carrying 2 men. Taliban fighters armed with AK-47s, approaching the crashed aircraft with caution. Alex controlled her breathing, forcing herself to remain calm. 6 against 1. Terrible odds under ideal circumstances. Nearly impossible given her injuries and limited ammunition. But she was a Morgan, and Morgans didn't surrender. The fighters reached the wreckage and dismounted, moving carefully around the destroyed A-10. She could hear their voices, carried on the wind, excitedly discussing their find. One climbed onto the fuselage, peering into the shattered cockpit. Finding it empty, he shouted to the others. They immediately spread out, scanning the plateau for the pilot. For her. Alex remained perfectly still, controlling her breathing, minimizing her profile behind the rocks. The fighters began a methodical search pattern, 2 moving toward her position, while the others checked other potential hiding spots. She estimated ranges, calculated angles. The nearest pair would be within effective pistol range in less than a minute. The others were already too far for reliable shots with a handgun. Alex decided to wait until the closest pair was within 20 yards, then engage. She'd take them quickly, then relocate immediately. Standard counter-ambush tactics taught from her earliest days of combat training. The fighters moved closer, their voices low as they communicated with each other. 25 yards. 23. A new sound cut through the air, the unmistakable whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of helicopter rotors growing rapidly louder. The Taliban fighters heard it too. Their heads turned toward the sound, their body language instantly changing from hunters to hunted. One shouted commands and they all ran for their motorcycles, suddenly eager to be anywhere else. Alex risked raising her head for a better look. Approaching from the east were two Apache attack helicopters, their distinctive silhouettes unmistakable against the sky. The QRF had arrived ahead of the schedule. The Taliban fighters scrambled onto their motorcycles and accelerated away, but they'd never outrun Apaches in open terrain. The lead helicopter banked slightly, bringing its 30mm chain gun to bear. What followed was not combat, but execution. The Apache's cannon spoke with authority, erasing the fleeing fighters from existence in a series of precision bursts. 6 men became zero in less than 10 seconds, the smoking remains of their motorcycles, the only evidence they'd ever been there. Behind the Apaches came a larger shape, a CH-47 Chinook transport helicopter carrying the quick reaction force. Relief washed over Alex like a physical wave, weakening her limbs and bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. She was going home after all. With the last of her strength, Alex pulled a signal flare from her survival pack and fired it into the sky. A bright red star climbed above the plateau, marking her position for the approaching helicopters. The Apaches spotted it immediately. One peeled off to continue scanning for threats, while the other moved toward her position, hovering protectively as the Chinook approached for landing. As the massive transport touched down 50 yards away, disgorging a team of Air Force pararescue men, Alex allowed herself to slump against the rocks. Her part was done. The professionals would handle the rest. The PJs reached her position at a run, their weapons scanning for threats, even as their trained eyes assessed her medical condition. The lead PJ knelt beside her, his face a mask of professional concern as he began checking her injuries. "Major Morgan, I'm Technical Sergeant Wilson. We're here to take you home." "The SEALs," Alex asked, her voice barely audible over the helicopter noise. "Safe, all extracted, 3 wounded but stable." Wilson worked as he talked, starting an IV line with practiced efficiency. "You did good, Major. Real good." 2 more PJs arrived with a stretcher. With gentle precision, they transferred Alex onto it, securing her for transport. As they lifted her, she caught a glimpse of her destroyed aircraft in the distance. The mighty Warthog broken and dead on foreign soil. "My bird," she whispered. Wilson followed her gaze and nodded in understanding. "Nothing left to salvage, ma'am. We'll place demolition charges before we leave. Standard protocol. Can't leave anything for the enemy." Alex nodded weakly. It seemed fitting somehow. The aircraft had given everything to complete its mission. Now it would disappear entirely, leaving nothing behind but its accomplishments. Just like her father. As they carried her toward the waiting Chinook, a tall figure emerged from the helicopter and strode toward them. Colonel James Harrison, his flight suit rumpled and his face grim with a concern. "Sir," Alex's surprise momentarily overcame her pain. Wing commanders didn't typically join rescue missions into hostile territory. Harrison fell into step beside the stretcher. "Couldn't let my best pilot get picked up by just anyone," he said, his gruff voice belying the emotion in his eyes. "Besides, I made a promise to your father a long time ago." Alex wanted to ask what promise, but darkness was encroaching at the edges of her vision. The painkillers and the release of tension were finally taking their toll. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was Harrison's weathered face watching over her, with the same expression he'd worn at her father's funeral 2 decades earlier. The first sound Alex became aware of was the steady beep of medical monitors. The first sensation was the absence of pain, replaced by the floating disconnection of heavy painkillers. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in a hospital room at Bagram Air Base, her body connected to various machines monitoring her vital signs. Seated beside her bed, his massive frame making the standard chair look comically small, was Master Sergeant Ryan Davis. The veteran crew chief was reading a dog-eared paperback, his reading glasses perched incongruously on his broad nose. "Chief," Alex's voice emerged as a croak, her throat dry from intubation during surgery. Davis looked up, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Major." He reached for a cup of ice chips and offered her one. "Doctor said you'd be waking up soon. 2 broken ribs, dislocated shoulder concussion, and enough bruises to qualify as modern art, but no permanent damage." Alex accepted the ice gratefully. "How long?" "You've been out for about 18 hours. They had to do some minor surgery to remove bone fragments from your shoulder." He set the cup aside. "The docs say you'll make a full recovery." though your flying days might be on hold for a while. The SEALs, Davis nodded, all safely extracted. The 3 wounded are in the same hospital 2 floors up. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood has been down to check on you 3 times already. Alex absorbed this information, relief washing through her. The mission had been worth it. Lives had been saved. But there would be consequences, she knew. Hayes Davis's expression darkened. Already filing paperwork for a court-martial. Insubordination. Destruction of government property. Violation of direct orders. The works. Alex had expected nothing less. Actions had consequences. Her father had taught her that. She'd made her choice with open eyes. Colonel Harrison is fighting it, Davis continued. But it's an uphill battle. Hayes has got half of CENTCOM backing him. They're saying you set a dangerous precedent, that other pilots will think they can disregard the chain of command whenever they feel like playing hero. Before Alex could respond, the door to her room swung open. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Hayes walked in his uniform, perfectly pressed, his face a mask of controlled anger. "Chief, give us the room," Hayes ordered without preamble. Davis looked to Alex, who nodded slightly. With obvious reluctance, the crew chief stood, giving Hayes a look that bordered on insubordination itself, then left the room. Hayes waited until the door closed behind Davis, then turned to Alex. "Major Morgan, I see you've rejoined the conscious. Good. I wanted you awake to receive this." He placed an official-looking document on her bed tray. Formal notification of charges under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Insubordination. Willful disobedience of a lawful order. Destruction of government property. Reckless endangerment. Alex said nothing, her eyes on Hayes' face rather than the document. "You disobeyed a direct order, Morgan. You took a $30 million aircraft into prohibited airspace against explicit instructions. You destroyed said aircraft. These are not minor infractions." "I saved 12 Americans," Alex replied, her voice stronger now. "SEAL Team 7 is alive because of my actions." Hayes' jaw tightened. "The regulations exist for a reason, Major. If every pilot decided their judgment or superseded the chain of command, we'd have chaos. The fact that your gamble paid off this time doesn't justify the violation." "Is that what you told yourself after Fallujah?" Alex asked quietly. "When those 3 Marines died because we followed regulations instead of saving them?" A flash of something crossed Hayes' face. Pain, regret. It was gone too quickly to identify. "Fallujah was different," he said flatly. "The risk assessment was solid. The decision was correct based on the intelligence available." "The decision was wrong," Alex countered, her voice level, despite her rising anger. "Men died because we circled above them instead of providing the support they needed. Just like men would have died yesterday if I'd followed your order." Hayes leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't see their faces every night, but the system only works if we all adhere to it, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." For a moment, Alex glimpsed the man beneath the rigid exterior, a career officer carrying his own burdens, his own regrets. "Did you know about the hydraulic leak?" she asked suddenly. Hayes straightened, his expression closing again. "What leak?" "The secondary hydraulic system. Davis flagged it last week. Maintenance deferred repairs citing budget constraints. I was told you signed off on the deferral. Routine maintenance issues are delegated to the maintenance chief. I don't personally review every report." "It wasn't routine. Davis marked it as a flight safety concern. It should have triggered an immediate grounding until repaired." Hayes' expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "If there was a mechanical issue with your aircraft, that will be part of the investigation. It doesn't change the fact that you disobeyed a direct order." The door opened again before Alex could respond. Colonel Harrison entered, followed by a man Alex recognized immediately, despite having never met him in person, General Thomas Clark, commander of all U.S. Air Forces in Afghanistan. Hayes snapped to attention. "General Clark, sir. I wasn't informed you would be visiting." "At ease, Colonel," Clark said, his voice carrying the subtle accent of old money and East Coast education. "I'm not here officially. Just checking on our wounded pilot." He turned to Alex. "Major Morgan, how are you feeling?" "Better than my aircraft, sir," Alex replied, earning a slight smile from the general. "Yes, I've seen the satellite imagery. Quite a landing considering the circumstances." Clark glanced at the document on Alex's tray. I see Colonel Hayes has already delivered the charges. Just following protocol, sir, Hayes said stiffly. Clark nodded. Protocol's important, Colonel, as is judgment. He picked up the document and examined it briefly. Serious charges. They'll require a thorough investigation before proceeding to court-martial. The facts are not in dispute, sir, Hayes pointed out. Major Morgan admits to disobeying direct orders. Facts rarely tell the whole story, Colonel. Clark set the document down. For instance, I've just come from reviewing the maintenance logs for Major Morgan's aircraft, specifically the hydraulic system issue that was flagged and deferred. Hayes's posture stiffened further if that were possible. As I was explaining to Major Morgan, routine maintenance deferrals are standard procedure when they don't impact flight safety. Except this wasn't routine, was it? Clark's voice remained pleasant, but his eyes had hardened. The deferral form requires a commander's signature acknowledging that the issue does not constitute a flight safety risk. Your signature is on that form, Colonel. I sign dozens of forms each day, sir. And yet this particular deferral saved exactly $27,000 in parts and labor. $27,000 that kept your maintenance budget under cap for the quarter, ensuring you received your performance bonus. Clark's smile never reached his eyes. An interesting coincidence. The room fell silent except for the beeping of Alex's monitors. Hayes's face had drained of color, but his expression remained defiant. Furthermore, Clark continued, I've just come from speaking with Lieutenant Commander Blackwood and his team. Their official report makes for compelling reading, particularly the part where they state unequivocally that without Major Morgan's intervention, they would have been overrun and killed to the last man. He turned back to Alex. The Navy is quite impressed with you, Major. Not often the SEALs admit they needed saving. Just doing my job, sir, Alex replied, the standard response of service members throughout history. Above and beyond, I'd say. Clark looked back at Hayes. Colonel, I believe you have duties elsewhere. General Harker is expecting your budget briefing at 1400 hours, is he not? It was a dismissal, clear and unmistakable. Hayes hesitated only briefly before nodding stiffly. Yes, sir. By your leave, sir. After Hayes had departed, Clark turned to Harrison. James, could you give me a moment with Major Morgan? Harrison nodded. Of course, sir. He moved to the door but paused before exiting. Alex, we'll talk later. When they were alone, Clark pulled up the chair Davis had vacated and sat beside Alex's bed. Up close, she could see the weight of command in the lines of his face, the silver at his temples. Your father was a friend of mine, he said without preamble. We flew together in the early days before I moved up to fighters and eventually a desk. This was news to Alex. He never mentioned you, sir. Clark smiled slightly. Bill wasn't one to drop names, but he saved my life once, much as you saved those SEALs. Similar circumstances, actually. Regulations said to abort. Bill decided men on the ground were more important than regulations. He leaned back in the chair, his eyes distant with memory. There was an investigation afterward, talk of court-martial. But in the end, they gave him a medal instead, because the mission is what matters. The people are what matter. With respect, sir, it sounds like the circumstances are quite different. My father wasn't court-martialed. I'm facing serious charges. Are you? Clark reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper which he handed to Alex. This came in about an hour ago. Special commendation from Admiral McRaven himself, commander of all Special Operations Forces. Quite strongly worded, he's recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. Alex scanned the document, scarcely believing what she was reading. Between this, the testimony of the SEAL team, and the maintenance discrepancies coming to light, I suspect those charges will quietly disappear. Clark stood, straightening his uniform. Colonel Hayes has been due for rotation back to the Pentagon. I believe I'll expedite that process. Thank you, sir, Alex said, still processing everything. Clark moved toward the door but paused, looking back. Your father would be proud, Major, not just of your flying but of your choice. Always remember, we don't serve regulations. We serve people. After Clark departed, Alex lay back against her pillows, emotions washing through her in waves. Relief, vindication, pride, and something else. A sense that her father was somehow present, nodding in approval from wherever pilots went when they flew their final mission. She closed her eyes, suddenly exhausted despite her long unconsciousness. As sleep claimed her, she heard her father's voice from memory reading from his pilot's notebook. The most important instrument in any cockpit is the pilot's conscience. Alex awoke to find her room dimly lit, the monitors casting a soft glow in the darkness. Night had fallen outside her window, the lights of Bagram Air Base twinkling like earthbound stars. She wasn't alone. A figure sat in the shadows beside her bed, nearly invisible in the gloom. "Who's there?" she asked, her hand instinctively reaching for the call button. "Easy, Major, it's Blackwood." The figure leaned forward, resolving into the features of Lieutenant Commander Marcus Blackwood, SEAL Team 7's commanding officer. Even in the dim light, Alex could see the exhaustion etched on his face, the burden of command and recent combat. "Commander," Alex acknowledged, relaxing slightly. "Checking to see if I'm still breathing." A hint of a smile touched Blackwood's stern features. "Something like that." He shifted in his chair, wincing slightly. "Doctor says you'll make a full recovery. You look like you could use some recovery time yourself." Blackwood shrugged. "Cracked rib. Nothing serious. I've had worse from training exercises." A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with the unspoken weight of shared experience. They'd never served together, never trained together, but yet they were bound by the peculiar brotherhood of those who risk everything for each other. "I didn't properly thank you," Blackwood finally said, "for what you did up there." "No need. Anyone would have done the same." Blackwood's expression darkened. "No, they wouldn't. Hayes wouldn't. Most pilots would have followed orders and left us to die." He leaned forward, his eyes intent in the dim light. 12 men are alive because you chose differently." Alex looked away, uncomfortable with gratitude she wasn't sure she deserved. "I was just returning the favor. You saved me in Helmand. Now we're even." "Is that what you think this was about, settling a debt?" Blackwood's voice held a note of disappointment. "No," Alex admitted. "It was about doing what had to be done." "What was right?" Blackwood nodded, satisfied. "Your father taught you well?" Alex's eyes snapped back to his face. "You knew my father. I was a young SEAL fresh out of training. My first deployment was Desert Storm." Blackwood's gaze turned inward, seeing across decades. "We were pinned down in Iraq much like yesterday. No hope of extraction. Then we heard it. That sound." "The GAU-8, Alex said softly. "Sounds like the sky tearing open." "You called it the hand of God," Blackwood confirmed. "Your father made 3 passes, each one closer than the last. Pulled our asses out of certain death." He paused. "On his final pass, he took heavy fire. His aircraft was damaged, but he stayed on station until our extraction arrived." A chill ran down Alex's spine. This was a part of her father's story she'd never heard. "He died a week later," Blackwood continued. "Different mission, same choice. Men on the ground needed help. He provided it regardless of cost." "I never knew the details," Alex whispered. "Just that he didn't come back." Blackwood nodded. "Most don't hear the full story. Classified operations, sensitive information. But I recognized your name when I pulled you out in Helmand. Morgan. I remembered that sound, that A-10 from years ago. I knew you had to be his daughter." He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small that gleamed dully in the low light. "We don't give these lightly, Major." He placed the object in her hand. A SEAL trident. The gold eagle and anchor insignia that marked the elite warriors earned through the most grueling training program in the military. "I can't accept this," Alex protested. "I didn't earn it." "Neither did your father. But he wore one until the day he died. Given to him by my commanding officer after he saved us in Iraq." Blackwood's voice was firm. "Some things are earned in ways the regulations don't recognize." Alex closed her fingers around the trident, feeling its weight physical and symbolic. A connection to her father she'd never expected to find. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Blackwood stood grimacing slightly from his own injuries. "Get some rest, Major. You've earned it." He moved toward the door but paused, looking back. "They call you Valkyrie, don't they? Your call sign?" Alex nodded. "Since flight school." "Appropriate," Blackwood said with the ghost of a smile. "In Norse mythology, the Valkyries chose who lived and who died in battle. Yesterday you made that choice for 12 men." He offered a small salute. "We'll remember." After Blackwood departed, Alex lay awake for a long time, holding the trident. and thinking about choices, consequences, and the legacy of a father she'd spent her life trying to understand. Outside her window, the night sky over Afghanistan held stars beyond counting, each one a reminder of how small human conflicts were in the grand scheme of things. Yet to the individuals involved, the fighters on the ground, the pilots in the sky, the families waiting at home, nothing could be larger or more important. She thought of Hayes so rigid in his adherence to protocol, yet carrying his own burdens of past decisions. Of Harrison, who had kept faith with her father's memory for 20 years. Of Davis, who had talked her through the emergency procedures that saved her life, each of them making choices, living with consequences. She thought of her father, who had made the ultimate choice just as she nearly had. The choice to place mission above self, to risk everything for others. The Warthog was never meant to be beautiful. It was meant to be effective, to bring devastating force exactly where needed to protect those on the ground who had no other hope. In that, it was the perfect expression of its pilot's purpose. As dawn began to lighten the sky outside her window, Alex finally drifted back to sleep, the seal trident clutched in her hand, a connection to her father, and a reminder of the choice she'd made. The choice she would make again if faced with the same circumstances. Because some things were worth any price. The mission is what matters. The people are what matter. In the end, nothing else counts for much at all. 3 days passed in the sterile confines of Bagram's medical facility. For Alexandra Morgan, accustomed to the freedom of the sky, the hospital room had become both sanctuary and prison. Her body was healing the ribs, knitting the concussion, fading the dislocated shoulder, responding to treatment. But deeper questions remained unresolved, hovering at the edges of consciousness like distant thunderclouds. The morning of the 4th day brought a visitor Alex had been half expecting, half dreading. Colonel James Harrison arrived as dawn broke over the mountains, his weathered face more lined than usual, his uniform impeccable despite the early hour. "Wheels up at 1400, he announced without preamble. "Medical transport back to Ramstein, then stateside. You're going home, Major." Alex nodded, absorbing the news. "And the investigation?" Harrison settled into the visitor's chair, with the careful movements of a man who had spent too many years in cockpits. "General Clark works fast when motivated. The official inquiry has been reclassified as an incident review. No charges will be filed." Hayes can't be happy about that. Hayes is no longer in theater to be happy or unhappy about anything. He's been reassigned to the Pentagon effective immediately. Harrison's expression remained neutral, but satisfaction glimmered in his eyes. Apparently, there are concerns about maintenance oversight in his command structure. Alex said nothing. Military justice had its own rhythm, its own code. Hayes would never face formal charges for the maintenance deferral that had compromised her aircraft, just as she would never face court-martial for disobeying his orders. The system protected itself while acknowledging in its oblique way that something had gone wrong. "They're decommissioning the Warthog fleet," Harrison continued after a moment. "Budget cuts changing priorities. Your bird would have been among the last to go anyway, given its age. They're calling your crash the final combat loss of the A-10 program." The news hit Alex harder than expected. The A-10 wasn't just an aircraft to her. It was legacy purpose connection to her father. To hear it would be phased out felt like losing him all over again. Harrison seemed to read her thoughts. "Nothing flies forever, Alex. Not aircraft, not pilots." He leaned forward, his voice softening. "But some things endure beyond the metal and the missions. What you did out there, that's what matters. That's what lasts." "I was just doing my job," she replied, falling back on the safe response. "No," Harrison's voice took on an edge. "Your job was to follow orders, to maintain the chain of command, to preserve military assets." His eyes held hers. "What you did was choose lives over regulations, choose right over rules, just like your father did." At the mention of her father, Alex felt a familiar tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with her healing ribs. "Blackwood told me some things about my father's last missions, things I never knew." Harrison nodded, unsurprised. Bill Morgan was a legend among those who knew what to look for. Not the kind who made the recruiting posters or the history books. The kind who did what needed doing regardless of cost. He seemed to make a decision, reaching into his uniform pocket to withdraw a small notebook. Alex recognized it instantly, her father's pilot's log, the one she carried on every mission. Except this wasn't her copy. The binding was different, the wear patterns unfamiliar. This was your father's original notebook, Harrison explained, confirming her suspicion. The one you carry is the copy he made for you. Oh. This one he gave to me the day before his final flight. He held it out. It's time you had both. Alex took the notebook with reverence, feeling its weight. Why did he give it to you? Why not leave it with his personal effects? Harrison's gaze shifted to the window to the mountains beyond. Because he knew what was coming. He'd made calculations no pilot wants to make. A pause heavy with memory. Bill knew his mission the next day was likely one way. The intelligence, the enemy positions, the terrain. All of it spelled suicide mission. But there were men on the ground who needed close air support. Men who would die without it. He could have refused the mission, Alex said softly. Cited regulations. The risk assessment would have justified it. He could have. Many would have. Harrison's eyes returned to hers. But that wasn't who William Morgan was. He understood what the uniform really means, what the oath really demands. Alex opened the notebook, turning carefully through pages filled with her father's distinctive handwriting. Notes on aircraft performance, observations about enemy tactics, technical details that had saved her life countless times through their application in her own flying. Near the back, she found entries she'd never seen before. Personal reflections, concerns about increasing political constraints on operations. And on the final pages, letters, one addressed to her mother, one to Harrison, and one to her. With hands that suddenly trembled, Alex read words her father had written 20 years earlier, knowing they might be his last. Alexandra, my brave girl, if you're reading this, then I've flown my final mission. I hope you'll understand someday why I had to go, even knowing the odds. There are men below who will not survive without air support. Men with families waiting just like ours. I can't choose my life over theirs. Not and still call myself the man I've tried to be. You may follow me into the sky someday. If you do, remember that the controls in your hands are connected to more than just the aircraft. They're connected to the lives below, to the people who depend on you when no one else can help. Sometimes the regulations will tell you to turn away. Sometimes your instincts will tell you to stay. Trust your heart in those moments. It will guide you true. I love you more than the sky itself, more than words can capture. Fly high, Alex. And when the hard choices come, as they will remember, we serve people, not protocol. We protect lives, not regulations. All my love, always, Dad. Alex closed the notebook, overwhelmed. The words bridged decades, connecting her to the father she'd lost, affirming choices she'd made without knowing he'd face the same. He knew, she whispered. He knew exactly what would happen. Harrison nodded. To Bill, the calculation was simple. His life against many. An easy math, if terrible in its personal cost. He reached across to touch the notebook. I promised him I'd give this to you when you were ready, when you'd face the same choice he did. In the Korangal. Alex understood now. That's what you meant on the radio when you said it was my decision. I couldn't order you to do what Bill did. No one could. That kind of choice has to come from within. Harrison's face held decades of carried weight. I watched your father fly to his death, Alex, knowing what awaited him, knowing I could have ordered him to stand down, could have cited regulations and protocols. His voice thickened. I've lived with that decision every day since. You made the right call, Alex said firmly. Lives were saved. Yes, at the cost of one extraordinary pilot, one irreplaceable friend. Harrison met her gaze directly. When I heard your voice on that radio in the Korangal, it was like hearing Bill again. Same situation, same impossible choice. I couldn't bear to be the one who ordered you to abandon those men. Not again. The realization settled over Alex like a physical weight. Her entire career, her mentorship by Harrison, her assignments, her training had been shaped by her father's final choice and Harrison's role in it, a debt the older officer had been paying for 2 decades. Is that why you've looked out for me? Guilt over my father's death. Harrison considered the question, his eyes distant. At first, perhaps, but over time it became something else. I saw in you the same qualities Bill possessed, the same understanding of what truly matters. He stood straightening his uniform with unconscious precision. You've earned everything you've achieved, Alex, on your own merits. Never doubt that. Before she could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Major Morgan, you have additional visitors. Behind the nurse stood Lieutenant Commander Blackwood, flanked by two other men Alex recognized from the SEAL team she'd saved in the Korengal. Despite hospital regulations limiting visitors to one at a time, the nurse seemed unwilling to challenge the three special operators. Harrison nodded to Blackwood with the respect of one commander for another. "I'll leave you to your visitors, Major." He moved toward the door but paused beside Blackwood. "She's just like her old man, stubborn, brilliant, and too damn brave for her own good." Blackwood's weathered face creased in a rare smile. "Sounds like a perfect combination to me, sir." After Harrison departed, the SEALs moved into the room with the controlled precision that marked everything they did. Even in hospital scrubs, Blackwood projected the quiet authority that had kept his team alive through countless operations. "Major Morgan," he began formally, "I'd like to introduce Chief Petty Officer Michael Ramirez and Petty Officer First Class Jason Miller. They insisted on meeting the pilot who saved our team." The two SEALs nodded respectfully. Miller, the younger of the two, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you personally. I have two kids back home who still have a father because of what you did." His simple words held more power than any formal commendation. Alex felt their weight, understanding in a new way what her father had meant about the lives connected to her controls. "I was just doing my job," she replied, the standard response feeling inadequate even as she said it. Ramirez, older and more weathered, shook his head. "No, ma'am. With respect, you were doing a hell of a lot more than your job." His voice carried the gravelly quality of career enlisted men. "We heard the radio traffic. We know you were ordered to abandon us. We know what you risked." Blackwood remained by the door, letting his men speak. His eyes, however, never left Alex's face, assessing, measuring. Miller gestured to his shoulder where a dressing indicated a recent wound. "Took a round just before you arrived. Would have bled out if we'd waited for the Apaches. The doc says I was about 10 minutes from no return." His voice was matter-of-fact, death discussed as casually as the weather. "Your first pass gave our medic the chance to patch me up. Your second pass kept the enemy from finishing the job." Alex thought of her father's letter. Men with families waiting just like ours. The abstract had become concrete in Miller's steady gaze in the mention of children who still had their father. "I'd make the same choice again," she said simply. The SEALs nodded, understanding completely. In their world, such decisions were common currency, the standard by which men were measured. After a few more minutes of conversation, Miller and Ramirez excused themselves, leaving Blackwood alone with Alex. "Your men didn't need to come," she said after they'd gone. "The thanks wasn't necessary." Blackwood moved to the chair Harrison had vacated. "It wasn't for you, Major. It was for them. To see the face of the person who risked everything from them to make it real." He settled his powerful frame, carefully mindful of his own healing injuries. "In our line of work, we depend on each other completely. Trust is everything. But rarely do we get to thank those outside our immediate team who make the difference between life and death." He studied her face for a moment. "You look like him, you know. Your father. Same determination around the eyes. You mentioned you knew him from Desert Storm." Blackwood nodded. "I was a new SEAL then. First deployment. We were tasked with hunting Scud missile launchers in western Iraq. Bad intelligence put us right in the middle of a Republican Guard mechanized division." His gaze turned inward, seeing across decades. "We were minutes from being overrun when your father appeared overhead. 3 attack runs, each one closer than safety would dictate. He drew their fire, gave us the chance to break contact." Alex had heard fragments of this story from Harrison, but hearing it from someone who had been on the ground, whose life had hung in the balance, made it viscerally real. "He saved us that day," Blackwood continued, "but his aircraft took heavy damage. He should have returned to base immediately." A pause. "He didn't. He stayed on station until our extraction was complete." Sound familiar? "That wasn't his final mission, though," Alex said. "He came back from that one." "Yes, for a time." Blackwood's expression darkened. "A week later, similar situation. Different team, same impossible choice." He met her eyes directly. "Your father established a pattern that day in Iraq, a standard. When others said it couldn't be done, he did it anyway. When regulations said to turn back, he pressed forward. Because people on the ground needed him." Alex thought of her own decision in the Korengal. The same pattern, the same standard. She had followed her father's footsteps without even knowing the full story. After the mission in Iraq, Blackwood continued, our team commander presented your father with something, a token of what his actions meant to us. He gestured to the seal trident he had given her 3 nights earlier. That's the legacy you've inherited, Major, not just your father's skill or courage, but his understanding of what truly matters when lives hang in the balance. Before Alex could respond, the door opened again. This time the visitor was unexpected and unwelcome. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Hayes stood in the doorway, his uniform as impeccable as always despite the early hour of his impending departure from Afghanistan. Hayes nodded stiffly to Blackwood. Commander, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like a word with Major Morgan, privately. Blackwood glanced at Alex, who nodded slightly. The SEAL commander rose with the fluid grace of a much younger man and moved toward the door. As he passed Hayes, he paused. Nothing was said, but something passed between the two men, an unspoken warning from Blackwood acknowledged with the barest nod from Hayes. Once alone with Alex, Hayes remained standing, maintaining the physical advantage of height and position. His face betrayed nothing, his emotions locked behind years of practice control. I'm being reassigned to the Pentagon, he began without preamble. Effective immediately. So I heard, Alex replied neutrally. Congratulations on the stateside posting. Hayes ignored the platitude. You've won this round, Morgan. General Clark has seen to that. The investigation has been reclassified, the charges dropped. You'll likely receive a commendation rather than a court-martial. His tone suggested he found this outcome fundamentally unjust, a perversion of proper military order. It wasn't about winning, Alex said, finding herself unexpectedly calm in the face of his obvious anger. It was about doing what had to be done. And who decides what has to be done? Each pilot individually, each commander. Where does it end? Hayes's control slipped slightly, frustration bleeding into his voice. The system only works because we all agreed to abide by it, even when we disagree, even when it's painful. Alex studied the man before her, seeing him with new understanding. Hayes wasn't evil or callous. He was a product of the system. He served a man who believed in order above all, who saw regulations as the foundation upon which military effectiveness was built. The system is made by people for people, she said quietly. When it fails the people it's meant to protect, it needs to be questioned. Hayes's jaw tightened. That's a dangerous philosophy, Major. One that leads to chaos if taken to its logical conclusion. Only if applied without judgment or conscience. Alex thought of her father's words. Trust your heart in those moments. It will guide you true. The regulations exist to guide decisions, not replace the human element entirely. For a long moment, Hayes said nothing. Then surprisingly, he moved to the visitor's chair and sat, bringing himself to eye level with Alex. The change in posture shifted the dynamic between them, making the conversation less confrontational. Did you know your father served under my command briefly? Hayes asked, his tone softer. Early in my career, I was a young captain. Then he was a seasoned major. This was before Desert Storm. The revelation caught Alex off guard. No, I didn't know that. Hayes nodded. He was everything the Air Force wanted in a pilot. Skilled, dedicated, fearless. A pause. But he had this frustrating habit of interpreting orders as suggestions, of making his own risk assessments regardless of what command determined. Despite herself, Alex smiled slightly. The description matched everything she knew of her father. I admired him. Hayes continued, surprising her further. And I feared what he represented, the precedent he set, the example he offered to younger pilots who lacked his judgment, his experience. Understanding began to dawn. Hayes's rigid adherence to protocol, his fierce defense of the chain of command, these weren't simply personality traits. They were reactions to men like William Morgan, reactions born of both respect and fear. When I heard you were being assigned to my command, I researched your record, Hayes admitted. The similarities were concerning. Same aircraft, same attitude toward authority, same willingness to push boundaries. Same last name, Alex added quietly. Yes. Hayes met her gaze directly. I promised myself I wouldn't let you follow your father's path, wouldn't stand by while another Morgan placed themselves above the system, no matter how noble the intention. The irony wasn't lost on Alex. Hayes had tried to prevent her from becoming her father, only to create the exact circumstances that would lead to her making the same choices he had. "What happened to my father under your command?" she asked, sensing there was more to the story. Hayes's gaze shifted to the window to the mountains beyond. Nothing dramatic. He disagreed with a mission parameter. I overrode his concerns. The mission proceeded according to plan. A pause. 3 weeks later, he requested transfer to another unit. His request was granted. He looked back at Alex. I didn't see him again until Desert Storm. By then, he was under Harrison's command. I was staffed not directly in his chain. I watched from a distance as he built his reputation as younger pilots began emulating his approach. And then he died, Alex said softly, making the same kind of choice I made in the Korengal. Hayes nodded, his expression unreadable. The specifics were classified. I wasn't privy to the full details, but the pattern was clear enough. He stood again, resuming his formal posture. I don't expect you to understand my perspective, Morgan, or to agree with it, but I wanted you to know this wasn't personal. It was never about you or your father as individuals. It was about the principle, the precedent. Alex considered his words. In his own way, Hayes had been acting from conviction just as surely as she had. His concerns weren't entirely without merit, even if his application of them had been flawed. For what it's worth, Hayes continued, I've reviewed the maintenance logs personally. The hydraulic issue with your aircraft should never have been deferred. That decision came from lower in the chain than my direct oversight, but ultimately the responsibility was mine. It was as close to an apology as his nature would allow. The system failed in that instance. Thank you for acknowledging that, Alex replied, recognizing the concession for what it was. Hayes moved toward the door but paused before leaving. Your father was a fine pilot, Morgan, one of the best I've ever seen. And while I cannot condone your actions in the Korengal, I cannot deny their effectiveness. A slight nod, almost respectful. Good luck with your recovery and your future assignments. After Hayes departed, Alex sat in silence, processing the unexpected conversation. The man she had viewed as an antagonist had revealed himself to be more complex, more human than she had allowed. His rigidity came from genuine conviction, not merely bureaucratic slavishness. Outside her window, the morning sun had cleared the mountains, bathing Bagram in golden light. Soon she would board a transport aircraft, leaving Afghanistan behind. Leaving the Korengal, the crashed A-10, and in some ways the shadow of her father that had defined so much of her life. What awaited her stateside remained unclear. A period of recovery, certainly. Perhaps a new assignment away from combat zones. The Air Force would need to determine what to do with a pilot who had demonstrated both exceptional skill and a willingness to disregard direct orders when conscience demanded. Alex opened her father's original notebook again, turning to the letter he had written her. Reading his words with new understanding, recognizing the weight of the legacy he had left not just for her, but for all who flew in his tradition. We serve people, not protocol. We protect lives, not regulations. Simple words, profound truth. 6 months later, Major Alexandra Morgan stood before a classroom at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. The Air Warfare Center's weapons school represented the pinnacle of Air Force combat instruction, where the best pilots came to become even better, to learn not just how to fly, but how to teach others to excel. The students before her were experienced A-10 pilots, men and women, with hundreds of combat hours selected for their potential to become the next generation of instructors. They watched her with the critical eyes of professionals assessing one of their own. Today's topic is decision-making under extreme conditions. Alex began, her voice carrying easily through the classroom. Her injuries had healed completely, leaving only the faintest scar above her right eyebrow as evidence of her crash landing in Afghanistan. Specifically, we'll be examining a close air support mission in the Korengal Valley, where standard protocols proved inadequate to the tactical situation. She activated the projection system, displaying gun camera footage from her ill-fated mission. The students watched in silence as the video showed her A-10's descent into the valley, the weaving between stone formations, the devastating effect of the GAU-8 cannon on enemy positions. This mission violated multiple standing orders, Alex continued when the footage ended. It exceeded risk parameters established by CENTCOM. It placed a $30 million aircraft and its pilot at extreme risk. By conventional metrics, it should never have been attempted. She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. It also saved 12 Americans who would otherwise have died. preserved intelligence that later prevented terrorist attacks on U.S. soil, and demonstrated that sometimes the difference between mission failure and mission success lies in recognizing when the standard approach is insufficient. A hand rose in the second row. Captain Thomas Reynolds, one of the more experienced pilots in the class. Ma'am, with respect, how do we determine when regulations should be followed versus when they should be reinterpreted? The question went to the heart of the matter, the central tension every military pilot eventually faced. Alex considered her response carefully. The regulations exist for valid reasons. They incorporate lessons learned through decades of experience, often purchased with blood. They should never be disregarded casually or without thorough consideration. She moved from behind the podium, addressing the class more directly. But the regulations cannot anticipate every scenario. They cannot account for every variable in the chaos of combat. That's where judgment comes in, where the human element remains irreplaceable. Another hand, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, one of the youngest students but already marked for advancement. How do we develop that judgment? How do we know when we're making the right call versus just rationalizing what we want to do? Excellent question. Alex gestured to the aircraft manual on her desk. You start by knowing this cold. Every system, every procedure, every limitation of your aircraft. Knowledge creates options. Options create alternatives to simply abandoning the mission when obstacles arise. She walked along the front row of desks, making eye contact with each student. Beyond technical knowledge, you develop judgment through experience, through mentorship, through honest assessment of your own decisions and their outcomes. And by understanding that your primary responsibility isn't to the regulations, but to the people those regulations were created to protect. The classroom fell silent, the students absorbing her words. Alex could see the impact of her message in their expressions, the recognition that she was offering something beyond typical instruction. You've all read the official report on the Korangal mission, she continued. You know the outcome. But what you may not realize is that similar scenarios play out regularly in combat zones worldwide. Moments where pilots must decide whether to adhere strictly to protocol or adapt to the immediate needs of those on the ground. She returned to the podium, bringing up a new image on the screen. A photograph of her father standing beside his A-10 in Desert Storm, his flight suit dusty, his expression determined. My father faced the same choice 20 years ago. Different war, different enemy, same fundamental question. She looked across the classroom. When lives hang in the balance, what matters more? The letter of the regulations or their spirit and purpose? For the next hour, Alex led the class through a detailed analysis of her Korangal mission, breaking down each decision point, each alternative considered and rejected, each calculation that had informed her choices. She held nothing back, acknowledging mistakes along with successes, presenting the full complexity of combat decision-making. As the session concluded, Alex offered a final thought. The A-10 program is being phased out. Budget priorities shift, technology advances, doctrine evolves. But the fundamental mission remains constant, to protect those on the ground who depend on us when all other options have failed. She closed her notes, her voice firm with conviction. Whatever aircraft you fly, whatever mission you undertake, remember this: we don't serve aircraft or regulations or budgets. We serve people. We protect lives. Everything else is secondary. After the students had filed out, Alex remained in the classroom gathering her materials. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the vacant desks. Not bad for your first lecture, a familiar voice observed from the doorway. Colonel James Harrison leaned against the frame, his uniform displaying the insignia of his new position as Commandant of the Weapons School. The promotion had come through shortly after their return from Afghanistan, a recognition of his leadership and experience. Room for improvement, Alex replied with a small smile. But they seemed engaged. Engaged, Morgan, they were hanging on every word. Harrison entered the classroom, examining the image of William Morgan still displayed on the screen. You've given them something to think about beyond procedures and checklists. Something essential. I'm not sure Hayes would approve of my curriculum. Harrison chuckled. Probably not, but then he's busy at the Pentagon these days, safely distant from actual combat operations. He turned serious. The students need what you're offering, Alex. The technical knowledge is important, But the judgment, the perspective, that's what will keep them alive when things go sideways. He handed her a folder stamped with official markings. Your permanent appointment came through this morning. The weapons school is officially your new home, at least for the next 3 years. Alex accepted the folder, a sense of completion settling over her. From her father's legacy to her own choices in the Korangal to this new role shaping the next generation of combat pilots, the circle had closed. There's something else, Harrison added. The first of the new advanced close air support aircraft arrived next month for evaluation. General Clark thinks you'd be the perfect test pilot given your A-10 experience. I thought I was grounded from combat aircraft. Medical restrictions after the crash. Harrison shrugged. Restrictions can be waived, especially when the right pilot is needed for the right mission. His eyes held a familiar gleam. What do you say, Morgan, ready to help define the future of close air support? Alex thought of her father's words from both versions of his notebook, of Blackwood and the SEALs whose lives she had saved, of Hayes and his concerns about precedent and protocol, of all the threads that had brought her to this moment. When do we start? She asked, already knowing the answer. 5 years later, Lieutenant Colonel Alexandra Morgan led a formation of 6 aircraft across the skies of an undisclosed location in the Middle East. The aircraft, a new generation of close air support platforms combining the A-10's ruggedness with advanced stealth features, represented the future Harrison had invited her to help shape. In her earpiece, a familiar scenario unfolded. American special operators pinned down in hostile territory. Enemy forces closing from multiple directions. Conventional air support deemed too risky due to sophisticated air defenses in the area. All call signs, this is Valkyrie, Alex transmitted to her formation. We have friendlies and contact grid coordinates to follow. Rules of engagement authorize weapons free on all identified hostile elements within the operational zone. She thought briefly of her father, of the choices that had defined his career and ended his life, of her own similar choice in the Korangal and how it had transformed her path. Valkyrie, this is Raptor 6. The voice of the ground commander crackled through her headset. We are surrounded on 3 sides, multiple casualties, ammunition critical. Cannot hold position beyond 10 minutes. Alex recognized the voice instantly. Marcus Blackwood, now a captain, still leading from the front despite opportunities for safer assignments. Copy that, Raptor 6. Valkyrie flight inbound ETA 4 minutes. Mark your position. As she led her formation toward the engagement zone, Alex felt a profound sense of continuity. The aircraft were different. The technology had advanced. But the fundamental equation remained unchanged. People on the ground needed help that only they could provide. Valkyrie, be advised. Blackwood transmitted, his voice tight but controlled. Enemy air defenses active in the area. Multiple SAM sites confirmed. Approach with extreme caution. Alex smiled slightly behind her oxygen mask. Same scenario, different day. The eternal calculation of risk versus reward, of protocol versus necessity. Understood, Raptor. We'll manage the threat. She switched to her formation frequency. All Valkyrie elements were going low and fast. Terrain masking all the way to the target area. Weapons hot sensors active. As her aircraft descended toward the danger below, Alexandra Morgan felt the presence of all who had come before. Her father, Harrison, the countless pilots who had made the same choice across decades of combat operations. We serve people, not protocol. We protect lives, not regulations. In the end, nothing else matters at all.